Hi, welcome to this video about event-driven graphical user interfaces, namely in JavaFX. So in the beginning, I want to tell you about how JavaFX works on a bit deeper level than I've done in my other videos. So I've said before in my other videos that when we start up our application from the JavaFX application, Uh, we do that by extending the application from our main class and then calling the launch method from the application, um, the static method called launch, with the arguments from our main method. So what that does is it does a number of things. One of the things is that it creates some threads. And what is threads? So threads is just word for the program branching. So that means that normally if I do something, if I print something on screen, it prints that and then it waits for it to actually be printed on the screen and then it goes for the next one. So it's linear in the sense the program goes into this method here, then it launches this, then it jumps to the next, to the next, to the next, like that. When we're doing threading, we're creating a new branch of our program. And this new branch means that we can have two branches running at the same time. So if I create a new thread here, for example, that will be running while the program does all of this stuff. And you might already have guessed there was some threads involved. Let's try to just do this small program I created briefly here, or very fastly created. So I just have like a text field and a text area, I think it's called. I have a window, I have a button I can click this that doesn't do anything. So in order for this to work, we kind of have to have something running because I can click the button while something is going on in here. So something is going on behind the scenes. Someone is actually waiting to see if I do something to this. And this is what this video is all about, understanding how that actually works. But let's go back to the beginning and look at this. So right now, the default is to override the start method. And we need to do that to tell JavaFX to create a primary stage and a scene that we can use for our initial program. So in this case, we're actually loading an fxml file. We could do this programmatically just by simply creating a new scene and then using the get children add and then add the button and the text area and the anchor pane and set the different variables or attributes for these, like 410 and the name text box, stuff like that. We could do that directly in here, so then we wouldn't need to load it. But normally it's nice to have these things in an fxml file so we can configure them instead of coding them. So this is the start part of it. So there are actually two other methods you should know about. So these two methods, one of them is called the init method. So if I press Alt Insert here, I can use this override methods to see which ones that can be overridden. There's the basic ones from Java-Lang object here. But the ones we're interested in is, of course, we have the constructor, which would probably be a bad idea to override the constructor. Instead, they provided us with the init method here for doing something before we actually create the JavaFX application. And then, so one of the things that JavaFX application does, it creates its own thread, and that thread is called the JavaFX Application Thread. And if we put anything into the init method, that will be run before it creates this JavaFX application thread. So that means that we can actually create anything else outside of the application thread if we want to do that. Then there's also the stop thread. So that is done after the program or the application if someone from the outside is calling stop, this is the method that's actually going to be to exit the application. So that's basically it. So that was just to explain these two methods. So what is the Java application thread? So let's try to open up Paint. So one of the things you should know is that the JavaFX Application Thread is a thread running and making sure that everything is working on the GUI. So we have our Java, if I can write this, FX application thread. I'll just abbreviate it app thread because it's so hard writing within this program. So this is the JavaFX application thread. And within the JavaFX application thread, it has something running that it kind of has a loop running here, like a while loop that runs, we can call it while true, because it runs forever. And inside of this while loop, it actually has something special going on. So in here, it has a list. This is it's not real code, it's just some kind of visualization here. It has a list of something called runnable. So a runnable is it's an interface in Java that makes you able to, it needs to implement a certain method for starting, or it's called run. It needs to have a run method. So threads can have these inside of them. And then it runs a runnable here. So we have, this is a runnable object here. And inside of this, there's some program here running. And when the runnable finishes, it says, now I'm done. And then the while loop will actually keep going. So when I click multiple items on my user interface, like I click the button down here, when I click the button, it actually sets that into this, it actually sets that into a list, and this list is actually a queue. So yeah, I already had it here. So it's like a queued list, and it puts it into the list when I click something, and then it tries to do that, run that, and then it does the next thing on the list. So basically, if I click this and then do something else in my user interface, it waits for the previous one to finish. So that means if I put something on my button here that takes a long time, let's say this takes like 5 seconds, 5 seconds, then I'll have to wait 5 seconds before I can do anything with the graphical user interface, because the JavaFX application thread is also the one updating that. So let's try that out for a second. So if I run my program now and I do something here, like I press the button, I can still do stuff. I can write something here and press buttons. Maybe not at the same time because it takes focus, but it doesn't take a lot of time. So let's try to do something interesting. So if I go into my controller, I already have a click event set up here. Let's try to say text box, append text, doing something slowly. And then we'll do some operation here that will take some time. So let's go we'll go for I to 1 million, and then we'll print something because that takes some time. woo, something like that. Let's see what that happens. So I'll print finished here. Like that. Maybe I spelled it wrong, that's okay. So we'll run it again and see what happens with this. So if I click the button now, it will hold and start printing here and then print doing something slowly finished. So why was that? Let's try that one more time. So we see it start printing down here and then it prints everything. So what is going on? Maybe I'll put it up just by a multiple of 10. So it's 10 million just to show the slowness of it. So I'm clicking now and now it's hanging the entire user interface. And and it even doesn't respond. If you look in here, you can see that I'm actually printing to the text box first and then printing finished. So what is going on here? So what is going on is that it puts this into the queue of things it needs to do. It puts this into the queue of, and then after that, it actually starts doing this. So this will take up the entire thread. And then afterward, it does this. So it actually halts the entire thread to print to this down here, just so that it can't do anything up here. So we can't really be sure that it prints up here first. Actually, it does only print afterwards because the thread is totally heavily loaded. So if we look in here, we can see the problem is really that we have something here that takes like 20 seconds or something. And also some of the assignments inside of the application thread is actually to update the graphical user interface and stuff like that. So that's why the updating happens only after we've done that. So just kind of some invisible things. Also, when I press the button, it kind of pops in and then it should pop out again, but now it's taking up all of its time down here. And I can't even move the window, it's just totally hanging. You've probably seen some programs like this. So let's just try something else. So now I want to show you, I'll just, let me see, 1, 2, 3. You can use this underscore just to, I think I'll put it at 5 million to make it easier to read this big number. So it's like putting a dot here, but that won't work in programming. So we'll just use underscore. That's the way to do it. Okay. So let's try to look at the different threads. So what you can actually do is you can print out the name of the thread. They are named. So if I start printing out the name of the thread here, I can say thread, and then I can say current thread, get name. That will give me the name of the thread. And I can print that out to the console. So when I start the program now, I should see main up here. Because, okay, so I'm actually not seeing main because I put this in the wrong place. Let me just, okay, I'll just say from main method. Let's try that again. So from the main method, we can see that the thread that I saw was the one called main. But as soon as we go in here from the start method, we'll see that it's not the same thread anymore. So what's going on with the launch is that we're creating the JavaFX application thread. So when we're going into start is actually started by the JavaFX application thread. And that's because the main thread is busy um, um, doing all the work on outside of the program to keep it alive so that it doesn't close down. So the main thread is kept alive as long as there's windows open in the JavaFX application. Okay, yeah. So the next thing to do is to try to identify some more threads. So let me just copy this and go into our controller and see what thread is here. So from button press method, let's see what happens here. When I click the button, oh, I printed a lot here. 5 million woos. Okay. So maybe I'll just put that down to 1 million and then put it after it finishes. So we see the main method is still main and then application thread. And if I run this, it's also the JavaFX application thread. So that's pretty cool. Of course, we can scroll up and see. So that means when we are inside of anything JavaFX related, like button clicks, all the events and everything, they are all in the JavaFX system. So let me show you why that is. So when we have something running, I'll just create a new one here. When we have something running, we have a window with a lot of stuff going on. And we want to make sure that when someone presses a button and does something here, that it's coming in the right sequence of events. So there is something here called the EventQueue, which is the JavaFX application thread is running everything from the EventQueue, these runnables. So whenever I click something, do something, it goes into this queue, and then it goes by the FIFO principle. So the first thing we put into it is also the first thing that actually comes out. So if I click the button and do something else, they are all in here. And then the FX thread will then try to do things one at a time like this. And as long as it's doing something, it cannot take the next one because the thread itself is actually trying to do some work as well. So that is interesting. So what if we want to do something like, let's say I want to print this. Instead of printing it here, I could print that in the text box. So I can say text box, append text. I'll put it here. No, let me not do that for now. I have another idea. So I put that text here. So let's say I want to print this, but I don't want my program to totally hang by that. So I actually want this to run this in another thread. I can show you how to do that. So now it's hanging because it takes some time to do that. And while it's doing that, it's hanging. So you can easily create a new thread, just call it T, and you can say equals new thread. And then you can actually just put a lambda expression in here. And inside of that lambda expression, you can set the method, the run method that you want to be run when the thread is started. And what we could do is that we could move this part here that takes a lot of time. We can move that in here, and then we can start the thread like that. So now this code that's in here will be running whenever I start this. So the application thread will start a new thread that will do this work, and the application thread will no longer be bogged down by that, because if this takes 20 seconds, what it will do instead, this will just start a new thread T that will do its work, and then it will just continue working on the event queue. So there will never be a problem. So let's try to do this and see what's going on. So if I click this now, I can still move around, I can do anything, and I can even put this up to 10 million. You saw that before, it was very slow. And while it's running in the background, it might slow my computer down a bit, but I can use my user interface because the system out print line is not really running in the JavaFX application thread. I'm not hooking up all the resources. So it looks pretty simple to do it like this, but there's a caveat to this that you probably wouldn't see right away. So this works fine as long as I'm not touching any graphical user interface elements. So as long as I'm not touching things that should be touched by the JavaFX application thread, I'm actually doing quite fine. But if I do something else, instead of printing to the screen, if I did something else, let's say that I just outcomment this part here and just do something really simple, like let's append some text here and say appending to text box from different thread. And then we could do something like thread, current thread, get name. So we can see which thread is actually doing it. I can do here. And bear with me because sometimes it gives problem most of the time, sometimes it doesn't give any problem. So in this case it did. Sometimes you can get lucky or unlucky that it will actually print up here the text, but most of the time it will crash the entire program like this and it won't work. And there's a protection mechanism built into JavaFX, which means that you cannot update JavaFX elements from an outside thread. It actually checks to see if it is the application thread that's actually changing it. So there's some problems going on here because now something has been updated from another thread, and normally we would actually see an error directly, an exception directly on that. But in this case, we just get some weird errors like exception index -1. So it can be hard to find these kind of errors. So actually we cannot do something like this. This is not a possibility to do that from another thread. It would be interesting though to see the name of the thread. So let's just take this print line here and change this into from new thread. And we can see that it is another thread. It's not the JavaFX application thread. And we can see it's called thread number 3. It could be anything, but we have the main thread and the JavaFX application thread running, so it just calls it thread number 3. So that's it. So if I press again, it's number 4. So it just has some kind of ID for creating thread names. We can also name the thread if we wanted to. So that's it. And the other thread is dead. So that's it. So now we're doing that. So that's basically it. That's basically what I wanted to show here, that you have to be careful when you run other threads in JavaFX application. You have to be very careful to see what's going on and not to do anything problematic like that. The last thing I wanted to show is I want to show just how can you get around this, because sometimes you want to do two things. Let's say, for example, I want to print out the name of the thread like this, and there's no problem in that because that's going here. But I also want to be able to print out this very fast. And I also want to append the text here. So I want to do both of these things. So how can I do that? So how can I append some text and also do this? So one of the things, there is actually some cheat code for this, where we can actually just force it to go onto the event queue, because the problem is when we are not putting these updates to the GUI on the event queue, we get into a lot of trouble. So what we want to do is putting it on the event queue. And fortunately for us, there's actually a command to do that. And that command is under something called platform, which is under the JavaFX application package. And if we add that up here, and that it does that automatically, there is a method called run later, And there is also some other methods for doing different stuff, but oftentimes it is the run later we want. We can check to see if this is the FX application thread. We know it's not, but this run later method is the usable one. So what we can do here is we can run something later. And the parameter it takes is it needs a method here that it runs later. So it needs a run method. So again, we can just do this lambda expression like that, and then put the code that we want to run later. Okay, so now it actually says run this whenever you have time on the application thread, then you want to run this. If we put this inside here, it would be the same as to take it out of the thread all in all. But this needs to go back to the actual thread. So in this case, we're kind of mixing, we're creating a new thread and starting it immediately. We are then starting some hard work, and after that, we tells it to update, because this is running in one thread, so it will not put this onto the event queue until it's done working. If we put the platform run later before this, it would actually print it before it started working. So maybe I should change this to finished working thread, and then we could take also beforehand and then say started working thread, because we can do this on the application thread because it doesn't take a lot of time. It actually takes no time at all. It's just updating the text box. So let's try this. We'll click on run. And now we should see, it should say all of the other stuff. It should say started working thread. And then when it's done, see, started working thread, and you see that is run on the JavaFX application thread because we put it on run later and it's still running. And then it should say finished working thread and then also JavaFX application thread. Yes. So this is kind of how it works. We need to be able to switch in and out of the context of the JavaFX application and not. And this can actually be quite powerful if you want to do something like database operations. So now it's kind of stupid printing here to the system out print line, but it was just, I needed something that took a lot of time, and oftentimes what takes time is input output operations like this. So this is maybe a stupid example, but it could also be that you had an internet connection that was slow, or you needed to do some big calculations in the background. You can do that and then update your graphical user interface using the platform run later. So I covered what events are here. So we have an event that goes in here and it runs on the application thread. I talked about the JavaFX application thread and the launcher. The launcher meaning the one actually running them in sequence. And then we talked about the GUI updating. You saw that it didn't update until after if we didn't put it in a separate thread. So, and also you saw that it could lead to problems if you try to update the graphical user interface from when not doing it from the application thread. So the last thing I'll do for my next video is how we can use listeners and observers and using binding in JavaFX. And this can also lead to some of these problems. This is why I've chosen to put this in the same series of videos. So that's it for application thread, and see you for the next video.